Hello my friends, and a very warm welcome back to my painting channel. And in this video we're going to be painting this Nighthaunt hero, this Dreadblade Harrow. But more importantly, we're going to be looking at two different factors for this. So two really important parts of painting miniatures and two really cool lessons that we're going to build up from. So we're going to look at wet blending, which is going to be a really cool, interesting and fun sort of technique. But we're also going to be looking at how to really push the contrast. So we're going to look at pushing the contrast really high so that we get this really sort of good combination between the dark tones right up through until we get these really sort of bright, vibrant, extreme sort of colors around the edges as well. So these two techniques are going to be absolutely fantastic. Now I'm going to put a few little sort of timestamps in the video so you can move across to whichever part of the video tickles your fancy. So if there is an area like you just want to know about the wet blending, then you can just skip ahead right now, because I'm going to paint the whole model, but you don't really need to follow the whole thing if you just want to see the wet blending. So I'm going to try and cut this down into timestamps for you so you can follow along if you want to paint the model, or you can just find and look at the bits that you want and take from it the lessons that you need. So first things first, that's all I'm going to do is I'm using a scale 75 Despair Green, and I'm using two thin coats of this paint. So two nice thin and even layers, so that this means that the paint takes to the miniature in a nice even fashion. Once that is done, then I am going to paint the base using a blue-grey pale from Vallejo, and that's all I'm doing is just covering all of the base in this one, and then we're going to pick out some of those details a little bit later. The base on this model is a little bit difficult to catch on camera, so I am sorry if things do get in the way a little bit, but don't worry, it just gives you an idea as to what we're doing. Now from there then I'm going to base all of the bone areas using the Army Painter skeleton bone colour. So this is a great colour. So this is a little bit of a toned down sort of bone cream colour. Now you can use the bone white from Vallejo as the base if you want, but this colour does have a little bit of a darker tone to it. So this creates a really good sort of base platform or a base colour that we can build up from when we build in those bone sort of colours and get that bone tone through. So what we're going to do is we're going to paint the bony area. So as you can see, we've got the skull of the horse, and we've also got the sort of rib cage here as well, and of course we've got the skull of the rider, the arms and hands of the rider as well, although technically not bone, more like a ghostly sort of colour. I'm actually going to paint this the same just to tie these colours together, and again, as I say, build some of the contrast so that we've got a little bit of a mixture between the sort of light and dark colours, and we've got the greens and the nice vibrant sort of skeleton bony kind of colours as well, so that this just allows your eye to move around the model and take a look at some of the details and some of the different areas and different aspects of this model as well. So I'm just going to try to take my time and not get too much of this on any of the other areas. It is important to allow all of your paints to dry while painting. As you can see, while I'm trying to paint these sort of rib cages, I am getting a little bit of the green, so I'm just going to leave this one dry a little bit more before going back and putting my base colours on there. Once that's done, then I'm going to use one of my channel favourites. So we're going to use Dark Rust 302 from the Panzer Aces. This is a Vallejo colour, and this is one of my favourite colours because this colour is a great colour to build browns up from. It's such a dark brown to begin with that it gives us the option to use so many different browns to build the colours and build the contrast back up. And that's all I'm doing with this brown is I'm just going to paint the hilt of the sword, but I'm also going to paint all of the sort of leather kind of looking reins and things like that just around the horse's head here. So I'm just going to try to take my time, and again, don't have to be too careful at this stage because this is all just the base colours anyway, but I'm just going to try my best not to get this on too much of the sort of areas of the model, just trying to paint this in a little bit more detail and trying to stick just to the straps. So I'm going to paint that all the way around because, as I normally say, later we're going to build this all back up and we're going to get that vibrancy really popping a little bit later anyway, so don't worry too much. This is just the base coat. Once that's done, then I'm going to use another one of my channel favourites, which is the gunmetal. So this is a really great sort of dark silver colour. This colour is fantastic for basing a lot of your metals if you're doing true metallic metals. And this is a really good sort of dark silver colour. It's actually a lot like the Citadel's lead belcher. They've got a very similar tone, this gunmetal and lead belcher. So if you're used to using Citadel tones, you could use that instead. But yeah, that's all we're going to do is just paint over the metal. So just the blade of the sword, the little sort of pommel area just at the back, and of course over the spirit or the ghost's helm. And then I'm also just going to use the very tip of the brush to try to pick out some of those silver bits then just across the reins, like I was saying. So we're just going to pick out some of those little silvery points and some of the little ringlets of silver that the little metallic ringlets that are holding all of the reins together. Once all of that is done, then I'm going to use a rosy flesh. Now this rosy flesh is a nice light pink colour, and as you can see I'm just going to use that to pick out the roses on the base. As I said, the base is a little bit complicated and a little bit difficult to show you on camera, so I'm going to try my best, and I do make a couple of mistakes painting the base, but that's fine because we can fix all of that as we go anyway. So once the roses are done, we are going to use military green, and this is a nice very dark green colour. This is a great colour that we can build up from. And what I'm doing with this, as I turn, you should be able to see as I'm painting, I'm going to paint the leaves on the base using this colour because this is giving us a really good base colour for those leaves. Like I say, I'm sorry about the base, it is a little difficult to show on times, but as you can see I'm just painting the leaves on this one, just like so. There we go. And that's all we're doing, is we're painting the leaves this nice dark colour, and it will dry down to be in a nice dark colour. And from there then we can build this up using all manner of different green tones, green colours, vibrant greens and all things like that, just to kind of allow the base to have a little bit more tone, a little bit more character, and to allow it to really pop when you're looking at the miniature as well. And that's the other cool thing, is when we're looking at a very interesting miniature like this, which is going to be a really high contrast miniature where we have really heavy darks and really light highlights, having something like the base where it's going to be quite neutral is really going to sort of again sort of drag your eye around the miniature and really show off all the different areas and different parts to the model as well. Now once everything is dry, then I'm just going to do what I normally do and just use a nice layer of strong tones. So this is just a nice dark brown wash. This is fantastic for darkening the model, but also putting a few dark areas into all of those creases. It'll tie those colours together and it'll allow us then to build the contrast and the vibrancy up from there. So I'm just going to cover the whole miniature in this. I'm going to try to be careful not to allow this to pool too much on the model. And as you can see, this is already having the effect where it's making the model a lot darker, but it's also tying all of those colours together, especially things like those bone colours, because this being a dark brown, it's really going to tie those bony colours together and really sort of allow it to sit into those recess points and create this great contrast that I keep talking about. So like I say, I'm just going to cover the whole miniature in this, nice and straightforward, nice even coat, just making sure that this goes and ties all of those colours together. You can really see across the hand, the hilt and the sword, just like so. Yeah, so you don't have to be too careful with this layer. That's the good thing about using a wash. Now once everything is dry and all of the wash is dry, we're going to go back to the Despair Green, and we're going to use this again, this really sort of dark green from Scale 75. This is a fantastic colour, and it is actually quite a lot like the Citadel Incubi Darkness. So if you've used Citadel paints before, then it's a little bit like the Incubi Darkness. It's a very dark sort of greeny blue sort of colour. It's very good tone for this sort of undead model. And that's all I'm going to do now. If you've seen my other videos on how to paint horses, I'm going to use the very same sort of technique that I've used in the previous videos. And that's all I'm going to do, is just using the very tip of the brush. I'm just going to start to pick out some of the colours, some of the highlights, following sort of the area where the paint is sat in the recessed areas, and we're going to start to build this up. Now the cool thing with this is I've added a little bit of water with the paints, and that's all I'm doing then, is just allowing the paints to flow nice and evenly, nice and smoothly onto the model. So just going to slowly build this up in layers. And the reason why we are adding a little bit of water to the paint, as I say, is we're going to build this up in layers. So you're building this up in thin layers, not going too crazy and leaving big blobs of paint on the model and things like that. It will tie into the model and blend into the model in a much more even fashion, and the paint will look a lot smoother. And as we go then, we're going to start to wet blend a lot of these higher tones and higher colours and higher contrast areas into the model. Now so far that's all I'm doing, is just slowly building the vibrancy of the base tone back up after the wash, as you can see. So like I said, following on from the video that I've done about painting horses, that's all I'm doing, is just using the tip of the brush to create those sort of brush strokes that will add that definition, that tone, that texture. So if you've followed any of my other videos and you've seen me paint in any of my other videos, you'll notice that that's kind of how I like to paint. Sometimes the brush strokes add that texture, add that character, and add that tone onto the model as well. but we're just trying to drag this colour. As you can see, we've got this sort of greeny blue dark tone which is just blending into the model in a nice even fashion. And we're going to do the same then, just picking up the creases across the arm and things like that. Now with the wet blending, and as we start to blend these tones and colours up, I am going to show you on a little bit more of a long sort of video, and that's just so that we can work out and play about with this technique and see how far we can push it, and just to give you an idea as to the brush strokes and the way that I am doing the sort of wet blending. So once that's done, what we're going to do is we're going to use the Despair Green, and we're also going to use the Arbon Jade, and I'm just going to mix half and half. So like I normally like to do, we'll go up by a half stop. And what that means is we're going to go with 50% of each. So you're going to use the base tone first, as we've just done with the Despair Green, and then you're using the half and half. So this is the Jade and Despair Green at the same portions. And that's giving us that light step up in between. And at first it might not look like this is doing too much. This might not look like it's creating a much vibrance or much definition to the model, because it's got quite a bit of that original base color to it. But that's the beauty of it, is as we build this up, we're slowly starting to build that tone and character and texture up. So that means as we keep progressing and we keep highlighting, it's going to be a little bit more subtle and it's going to be a little bit more pleasing to the eye. Otherwise, if we were to just go up straight away in big stops and in big chunks, that's not going to give you the same level of sort of blend, and it's not going to blend those tones and colours into the model in the same way. So what you'll end up with then is big sort of bright areas rather than a progressive gradual change. And that's what we're looking for, is just that gradual subtle change across the model, and then across the edges and the tips, then we're going to get really bright and vibrant. So once we've done that bit, we're then going to use the Arbon Jade. And the Arbon Jade, then we're just going to slowly build this back up. So as you could see, just like I said on the previous how to paint horses video, we're now going to start to pick out some of those lighter areas and using the brush strokes look to create that texture just around the neck area, and then just around the muscle definition and tone all around the shoulder area and the legs of the horse and things like that. Now the cool thing is, like I said, we've added a little bit of water so you can see just how thin the paint is and how quick and easy it is to manipulate. And now we're starting to get that light vibrant colour starting to show through. It's not too extreme, and it may look like it is a little bit too light when it's wet, but don't forget, paints always look lighter when they wet, and they dry down a little bit darker, especially when they thin and you've got a darker colour underneath. So that's all we're doing, as you can see, is just building this vibrancy gently, slowly, each layer at a time. And you can really see that Jade now is starting to work on the front of the horse in comparison to the back where we haven't done anything yet. So you can really see this colour starting to take effect and starting to gradually build that vibrancy. And again, this is all about that subtle change and that subtle sort of progression. Now we're going to mix a couple of different paint brands together for the next couple of steps, and we're going to use the Arbon Jade here, and then we're also going to use the Deep Green from AK Interactive. And again, I'm using half and half because I know the Deep Green is quite a vibrant colour, it's quite a vibrant tone. So if I was to go straight up to the AK Interactive from the scale 75, it would be too much of a jump. So we don't want that jump to be too extreme. As I said, we don't want big blobs of bright green. We want this to gradually transition between these sort of tones and these sort of colours. So again, we're building in the same sort of way, as you can see. I'm going down the neck using the brush strokes, down the sort of shoulders, the muscle definition, and then again across the legs and things like that. And I'm trying to show you the same area of the horse with each different layer that I'm painting, just so that it gives you an idea as to how this tone, this texture and this contrast is starting to build up through the model. And again, you can see that the paint is nice and thin, so I've got quite a bit of water with this, and this is just gradually building through sort of almost like a glaze, because the paint is quite thin. And this is giving us the opportunity then to put multiple layers on should we want to. So if we want more vibrancy, we can paint the first layer, allow it to dry down, and then paint another layer of the same colour on top, just to build that vibrancy up, and it gives you more control that way. So normally I like to say less is more, and this is kind of how it works. So when you're using this paint, it's all about putting less on to begin, because you can gradually build those tones and that texture, rather than putting too much on at first, because you can't kind of remove it in the same way then, you see. So once that's done, then we're just going to use the deep green on its own, and again mixing this with a nice little bit of water. You'll see just how quick and smooth this is moving onto the miniature, just like so. And now we're starting to see that huge sort of contrast boost. So we've got the base colors and things like that are all tying themselves together. It's a very subtle, very smooth transition on the model, and now we're starting to get that highlight, that contrast. We're starting to push this now to get this ethereal look out of the model. So we're starting to get this green, this sort of otherworldly sort of glow then, if you like, and we're building this glow layer by layer. So a layer at a time, we build in this glow and build in this transition. So as you can see, just down and around the leg area, and we're just building this just around those trailing parts as well, so the parts of the model that are trailing off, so these sort of glowing almost like smoke ethereal trails that are coming off. We're building all of these up as well. And there you go, you can see how thin the paint is now as we start to get around the shoulder area and the muscle transition as well. You can see where I'm just building that contrast, building that green tone, and it's nice and thin so that we can gradually build this up in layers, just like so. And again, we're using the mixture of the stippling effect, the sharp sort of brush stroke effect that we've done previously in other videos, and we're just gently building this up in each individual layer. And that's the beauty with this, is the idea is to build it up in layers. Is patience. It takes time, but it is very much worth it. And then what we're going to do, as you can see, so once you paint a little bit of the paint onto the model, you can then remove the paint or use a separate brush, which is normally the best option. You place the paint onto the model with the first brush, and then using a damp brush, so not a wet brush, but using a damp brush, you can manipulate and move the paint around the model, and that's how you create that wet blend. And I'll show you that a little bit more as we start to progress up the contrast now. So as we go in, you can see I'm just building this green, starting to get this green really making the model pop and tying this into the first main transition. The reason we're doing this is we're going to paint most of the model in the same sort of way, but then when we come to the extreme highlights, we're only going to do that on these areas at the back and on these trails, so that this gives us this real ethereal, vibrant boost. This contrast is going to be it's going to be really great. We're going to really saturate this with the green. So as you can see, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to place this green on the model, and we're just going to move this around the model just like so, and we're trying to build that color and that character, that transition up again. See, so you can see how smooth this is. You can see how it's having the effect. From there, then, we're going to use light green. So we're going to make sure that our deep green has dried, and then we're going to go and use this light green color. Now, this is the first major step up that we're going to use instead of a half and half. Now, you can use a half and half step if you want. That's absolutely fine. That would work equally as good. So that's all we're going to do, is just build the transition. And as you can see, we're still going with building this highlight, this vibrancy, and we're just still building that contrast level as well. So as I said, with these ethereal sort of smoky areas that are coming off the back, we're going to start to build those up in this really nice bright fashion. And that's all you do. So as I was saying, you put the paint onto the miniature, and then using a damp brush, you can see I'm dragging that now across so that it moves the focus of that paint, so you're not having one blob of paint drying in one area. So as you can see, I'll show you again. We're going to paint the paint onto the miniature like so, and the paint is already wet because it's got water in there. And then using that damp brush, there we go, you can see it's happening now. We're just slowly dragging that paint through, and that now is going to create a really subtle and really smooth blend onto the model. And you can see how quickly and easily it is to do. It looks fantastic when it dries, because where you're dragging that paint through, it's going to create this very natural, neutral, sort of smooth transition. So like so, it's just placing the paint onto the model, moving that paint around the model, and then using that damp brush then separately just to drag that paint through so that it doesn't sit in one blob, but it becomes a nice smooth transition. There we go, I'll show you again just like so. So just using that damp brush, you can see I'm manipulating and moving it around. Once that's done, we're going to use a really extreme highlight then of livery green. So this is going back to the Vallejo color, and this is very bright, and this is where I'm going to show you sort of the wet blend in in the most. So what we're doing is using a nice thinned down version of the livery green. You can really see that it's already having a direct impact on the contrast. It's really bright and really creating this lovely sort of vibrant green. And then I'm just taking the paint off the brush and using a damp brush, just slowly manipulating and dragging that colour through so that it creates that nice transition. And it, like I say, it's a patient, it's something that requires a little bit of patience, but it is a technique that is fantastic for this sort of model, because it does give you these sort of great sort of blends and smooth transitions on the model without you really needing to sit down and spend ages using a not ages, but without you needing to use something like an airbrush as an example. An airbrush would do this so much quicker and so much easier, but if you wanted to use a brush like I do, you can do it this way as well. Now, wet blending you can use in so many different ways. So not only can you use it on this kind of model, but you can also use it for things like shields, so the transition between the light and dark parts of the shields. You can also use it for things like skin, so when you're using your paints to build up the vibrancy on the skin, and where the light is hitting people's skin and faces and things like that, you can build it up in this sort of way. And this smooth sort of wet blend will give you the much more subtle and smooth transitions onto the model, and it just creates a really nice looking effect with the paint. It does take a bit of patience, as I say. It takes a little bit of time to get used to, but it is a really fun technique. It's something that I would recommend you give a go, have a bit of fun, go for it, and just be brave and just throw paint onto the model and just you know, use that damp brush to manipulate and move it around, because it is a really fun, interesting technique. Now that we've done all of the greens, we're going to move on and carry on with the rest of the model. And so I'm going to go with my Vallejo bone white now to go over the top of the skeleton bone that we used originally. And as you can see, again, using nice thin paint, I'm starting to build that vibrancy back up. So we're leaving the paint in some of the recessed areas so that gives us this contrast between the light and dark on the bone, and just using the very tip of the brush and then picking out all of those details. And we're going to do the same thing with the rib cages and the ribs that are poking through. And I'm also going to do the same thing with the hands and the face and all things like that as well. So yeah, just being very careful, using the very tip of our size 0 detail brush and just picking out those details. And then again, my next automatic and most common step up from using the bone white is using the Elfic flesh, because this is a much more vibrant sort of cream color. And this now we're just going to start to pick out the very edges. So we're just going to go around the eye socket of the skeleton on the horse, and we're just going to go around the sort of front area and around the mouth and the teeth and all little bits like that. Again, we're going to pick out the knuckles and the hands and the face and all these little bits just around the face, just like so. And this is going to build that vibrancy on the bone areas. There we go, nice and simple. And as I say, just around the arms and the knuckles and things like that, just around the hand, just to build up that contrast. And again, this contrast now, these white creamy sort of tones versus that sort of green and dark green colour that we've got, it's really going to allow the bone and the skeleton part to really stand off the model as well. From there then, we're going to use the gunmetal once more, and we're just going to give a very light dry brush across the sword, just like so. And again, if you wanted to, you can go back now and pick out all of those little bits if it has been darkened down too much by the wash. With this particular model, I'm not going to do that because this model is a ghost, so all of his equipment should be sort of dark and rusty and broken, so I'm not worried too much about that. Now from there, we're going to use a medium rust deposit from the AK Interactive, and this is a great sort of texture. And that's all we're going to do is using one of my split broken sort of basing brushes. We're just going to dab this into the pot, and then we're just going to generally sort of use the stippling motion just to build a little bit of character and a little bit of grime and rust just across. If you do put a little bit too much on, just like I've done there, I'm just going to use my finger or my thumb, you know, and just rub a little bit off so that a little bit of the silver underneath shows through, and it creates this really great sort of rusted, broken effect as well. It looks fantastic. It really is as simple as that. That's all you've got to do for the rust. It looks great. From there then, we're going to paint up the leathers. So if you've followed my channel and you've seen me paint leathers before, we're going to use the same tried and tested technique. I'm going to start with the leather brown from the AK Interactive, and we're just going to build this over all of those reins and those leather straps and just pick out all of the light areas that we want. just like so. So nice and simple. You can use a cool little stippling effect with this if you want, so that it makes the leathers look worn and broken and battered. We've spoke about this quite a few times in other videos in the past. Just using that stippling effect to create that texture and that contrast as well is a really cool way to go, and a really fun sort of technique to use as well, because as you gradually dab your brush, you'll see that all of your texture and things start to build up in each layer that you go as well, which makes it a cool little technique and a fun one to try and use. Now from there, the next perfect step up is using the leather brown and deep brown, and again we're going to use half and half, so just one blob of each, creating that perfect half stop. And once again we're just going to use that stippling effect, and you can already see the contrast now starting to show through on the leathers. And we're going to pick this out where we want the light to be and where we want some of the scratches to be and all things like that, and again sticking with that stippling effect. So yeah, these are just some of the simple little techniques that are very quick and easy to make, but they also make the models look fantastic. Sometimes you don't need to spend hours and hours and hours on a technique. Something can be as quick and as simple as just painting a few sort of scratches onto your leathers, and they can look fantastic. The good thing with painting things like ghosts and spirits and skeletons is not everything needs to be perfect, not everything needs to look fantastic and shiny and lovely, because these are ethereal, sort of undead, sort of dirty, grimy creatures, which is exactly what we want. So from there then, I'm just going to use the deep brown on its own, and this is then going to be the extreme highlights, so the extreme edges, and we're going to paint this again using the very tip of the brush, and again picking out those edges and creating little scratches. And there you go, you can really see that contrast now on the browns, where we've gone from that deep dark sort of dark rust color right up to this really nice sort of vibrant sort of almost an orangey brown color, which really makes it stand off the model. It really makes the color and the leather really sort of stick out. And if you want to be very careful, you can sort of create these little scratches and effects just around the leather areas as well, by just using the tip of the brush to kind of paint little crisscrosses like so. You can see I'm just going in different sort of ways and different shapes and patterns, and it just creates a little bit more character and tone and definition as well. So yeah, that's completely up to you. You know, you can be as fancy with it as you want, or just as messy with it as you want. You know, it's the models, the Ewer miniatures, you can paint them however you like. That's all I like to say. You know, it's up to you to paint them however you want. From there then, I'm just going to use a small layer of sky grey, and for this I'm just going to gently dry brush this across some of the stonework across the base, because we want this to have a little bit of a vibrancy and a little bit of a boost as well. So I'm just going to carefully dry brush this, and I'm going to be careful not to get this on certain parts of the base that I've painted as well. So as you can see, I've got a skull there that I've painted using the same techniques as I've done with the horse's skull, and of course I've painted the leaves and the roses as well. So just trying to dry brush this across, and as you can see, it's already having a great effect at building that vibrancy, just like so. Now when it comes to dry brushing, I always say less is more, because you kind of want almost no paint on the brush, and that gives you the opportunity then to really slowly build that layer up, and it gives you a little bit more control as well. When you've got too much sort of paint on your brush for dry brushing, you lose that control and you lose the ability to build the vibrancy, and what you end up with is blobs of highlight and blobs of color covering over too much of the model, so you don't end up with the sort of subtle kind of scratchy and sort of rough kind of effect that comes with dry brushing. The idea is less is more. The less paint on your brush, the better, because you can always build up in layers, just the same as we were doing when we were doing the wet blending. It's all about just gently building up those layers and gently building each layer at a time. So just take your time and try not to get this on some of the other colors that you've already painted on the base. From there then, I'm going to use a flat brown. So I've used the dark rust 302 on the base as well, because there are a few vines around the leaves. But that's all I'm going to do now, is just using this flat brown, is just build this little vibrancy and this little highlight across these little vines, as you can see. So this is kind of a reddy brown, so this is kind of reddish, or has a slight warm sort of red tone to it. And again, that's just going to add to a little bit more character with the base, and a little bit more sort of color and texture and things like that. As I say, it is difficult to show you the base and show you painting the sort of painting the vines and some of the leaves and things. It is quite difficult, but I'll do my best. From there then we're going to use a US olive drab, so this is just a nice drab green colour, and we're going to paint the leaves using this. And with this technique, that's all we're going to do is using the tip of the brush, we're going to paint this from the inside of the leaf out. So we're going to drag our brush from inside to out while leaving a few different brush strokes there, so that's creating the illusion of the sort of leaf texture in the centre, as you can see. So that's creating the ability of looking like there's little vines in the leaves and little sort of textures in the leaves as well. Again, like using the leathers, this is a very simple, quick and easy technique that will give us the ability to kind of make a little bit more contrast and make a little bit more character in the miniature using such a subtle and such a simple little technique. So as you can see, just using the tip of the brush to pull the paint across, and that's creating those vines and that vine sort of style inside the leaves, so that texture, so that they look a lot more like leaves should. From there then I'm just going to use the rosy flesh once more just to build the vibrancy back up on the roses. And that's all I'm going to do is just gently, again using the tip of the brush, try to just pick out some of those edges and some of those little colours, just to get that vibrancy popping again, just to create that little bit of a light sort of pink colour and a light sort of pink tone onto the base. And again, that's just going to be a little bit different because we've got sort of this reddy pinky colour on the base versus the big green sort of colour that we've got of our horse. And then I'm also going to use a very, very small amount of red tone, so this is just a red wash, and I'm going to place that gently onto the roses as well, and that's just going to give us a little bit of depth between the light pink to the darker red recess points as well, just like so. And there we go. Again, like I say, I'm sorry, the base is a little bit complicated and a little bit difficult for me to show on camera, but I'm doing my best to give you guys an idea as to how it all looks and how to paint it as well. You can see the skull on the base where I put a little bit of the rust and things on there, just the same as I had done with the sword and things like that. So all of the techniques will all tie together. And all in all, that is our Dreadblade Harrow painted. That is a cool sort of wet blend effect and a cool wet blend technique. You'll have to let me know in the comments below what you think of the wet blending. If you want me to go into more detail with it and spend a bit of time on doing shields with it, I can do that by all means. But please, let me know, request those things, and I will do everything I can to sort of build that on camera and show you sort of how I do it. So let me know what you think of this video. Let me know what you think of the overall and finished piece, whether the contrast of the light and dark looks really cool. So yeah, as always, my friends, thank you so much for all of your time, all of your effort, your comments, your kindness, your input. The input that you give this channel allows me to build and grow in my painting, but it also allows me to pass on the knowledge of painting onto others as well. So every suggestion you make makes a massive difference to the channel, so I thank you so much. I'd like to say well done to Edward as well for having a fantastic painting of his little dwarves, and I'd also like to, as always, just mention Michael Virtuoso as well for all of the kindness and friendship that he's given me on the channel as well. So thank you all. Please, my friends, take care, and I will see you all very soon.